Today, we are going to look at one of the most shocking and inexplicable tragedies in Japan. This is the story of the Miyazawa family, and the case is still under investigation. Although the crime occurred almost 24 years ago, I ask the faint-hearted not to watch this video, because the details of the story are truly horrifying. To all the rest, welcome to my channel, where we explore real crimes and strange phenomena. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe, and let's dive into today's story. New Year in Japan, like in America, is considered one of the most important holidays, when families gather together, celebrate and mark the arrival of a new time. On December 30th, 2000, the Miyazawa family was spending the day like many other families in Tokyo, preparing together to welcome the end of the year. The morning began with the parents waking up the children. Yasuka prepared a light breakfast, and they all sat at the table, discussing plans for the coming year. Later, the whole family went on pre-New Year shopping, walking through the bustling streets decorated with festive lights and visiting stores to buy everything needed for the New Year's table. They laughed, picked out gifts, and generally enjoyed the holiday atmosphere. Returning home, Yasuka prepared lunch, and they all sat down together, sharing a warm family moment. After that, they unpacked the shopping and began decorating the house. The children enthusiastically hung garlands and ornaments. In the evening, the family spoke with relatives on the phone, arranging plans for celebrating the new year together the next day. The head of the family, 44-year-old Mikio Miyazawa, worked in marketing, and as you can imagine, New Year is one of the busiest times of the year, so he periodically checked his computer throughout the day to respond to work emails if necessary. While he did that, his wife Yasuka entertained Nina and her younger brother Ray. After dinner, they spent the evening watching TV and finally went to bed. And at around 11:30 p.m., when all four were already asleep in their beds, a dark figure slowly emerged from the depths of the park, bordering the back of their house. The person silently stepped out of the shadows of the trees and entered the family's yard. Although in Japan it is considered normal to leave doors unlocked, as the country is generally safe, on that day the front door was closed.
The intruder then climbed a tree, reached out, and opened the bathroom window on the second floor, entering the house. Once inside, the intruder went to the nearest bedroom, where Rai was sleeping, and strangled the boy with his bare hands. This horrifying act likely made a lot of noise, which woke Mikia and forced him to rush upstairs from the first floor. The fight that ensued between Mikia and the attacker was short but brutal. The intruder was armed with a Japanese santoku kitchen knife, which he used to strike the father of two children repeatedly in the head so forcefully that the tip of the blade broke, embedding deep in the skull.
Before dying, Mikia managed to injure the intruder slightly, but he could not overcome him. The man was too strong. When his lifeless body fell, the intruder went down to the first floor, and consumed by some animalistic rage, attacked the already dead body again, repeatedly striking and tearing at the flesh with the broken knife, as if he wanted to erase even the memory of the victim. Finally, having finished, he went to the kitchen, took another knife, and then returned to the second floor. There he attacked Yasuha and her daughter. His attacks were not just brutal, they carried something almost demonic, as if all his rage and hatred were directed specifically at them. Each blow was fiercer than the previous one, with a clear intent to inflict maximum suffering before finally ending their lives. Later, investigators determined that he spent far more time and effort on Yasuha and Naina, and their deaths were far more gruesome than those of the father and son. Seemingly having achieved his goal, the killer nonetheless went outside and cut the phone line, likely to prevent any attempts to call for help or contact the outside world. If anyone had survived or hidden inside, he understood that the phone could be a critical means for them to summon help, and he decided to deprive the house of its last connection. However, the murderer did not rush to escape. He seemed to have lost all sense of time and, over the next few hours, wandered aimlessly through the house, performing a series of almost absurd and mundane actions, ignoring the bodies of his 4 victims. As if nothing had happened, he tended to his own wounds. He did not try to clean up the blood or hide the used bandages. On the contrary, he left them on the floor, seemingly wanting the authorities to find everything exactly as he left it.
He then moved to the kitchen where he made himself some tea, as if he were an ordinary guest. He took slices of melon from the refrigerator and 4 ice creams from the freezer, enjoying these small pleasures against the backdrop of the horror he had created. Later, he lay down on one of the couches in the living room and took a nap. Upon waking, he briefly turned on Mikia's computer and then used the toilet, not even bothering to flush. In the early hours of the new year, he finally left the house. On December 31st, 2000 at 11:00 a.m., Yasuha's mother tried to call her daughter's family to arrange plans for the new year. However, the call did not go through. As you may recall, the phone lines had been cut. Concerned, Yasuha's mother went to their house and rang the doorbell. However, no one answered, and there was no movement or sound inside. Feeling a strong sense of anxiety, she used her keys to enter the house. Before her eyes, a horrifying scene immediately appeared. At the foot of the stairs leading to the second floor lay the body of Miyazawa, the 40-year-old head of the family. Yasuha's mother began calling out to her family, but only silence responded. She went upstairs and saw the bodies of her daughter Yasuha, who was 41, and her granddaughter Naina, who was only 8. Driven mad with horror, she touched their bodies, as if hoping it was all just a nightmare that would soon end. In complete confusion, she went to the adjacent room, the very one next to the bodies of Yasuha and Naina, and there she found Rai lying in his bed. He had been strangled, which led investigators to conclude that he had been the first victim of this brutal crime. The police quickly discovered that the killer had left the broken weapon at the crime scene, which bore traces of both his blood and the victim's blood. He had also inexplicably left a small bag on the floor, which contained markers and a small amount of sand. All of these items were seized and sent for forensic examination in hopes of identifying the killer. Although fibers from the killer's clothing provided important leads regarding the perpetrator, it quickly became clear that finding him would not be easy. DNA and fingerprints were found and analyzed, but they did not match any records in Japan's national database. Looking at the crime scene photographs spread out on the table in his dimly lit office, Detective Takeshi Tsuchida felt focused, yet at the same time, deeply frustrated.
A week had already passed since the elderly woman discovered the bodies of her family, brutally murdered in their own home, and the investigation still yielded no results. Someone had managed to carry out all of this and vanish, leaving behind no traces substantial enough to catch them. As the head of the police precinct, Tsuchida inevitably found himself at the center of this high-profile case, receiving orders to resolve it as quickly as possible. First glance, it seemed that it would be straightforward. The personal belongings and evidence left by the perpetrator promised to provide a key to his identity. However, the DNA, as I mentioned, did not match any record in the national database, effectively creating an insurmountable obstacle to an obvious solution. The situation required a different approach. His team then turned to witness statements and surveillance camera footage, but here too, they were essentially working blind. The killer had not appeared on any of the cameras surrounding the house, and witnesses could not provide anything usable. Very systematically and cold-bloodedly, this person had avoided all possible traps, as if he knew every move in advance. This fact only heightened the anxiety, and gave the impression that they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than an ordinary criminal. Analysis indicated that the killer was a man of mixed heritage, with one parent, likely originating from southern Europe. His blood was identified as type A, based on the nature of the wounds inflicted on the victims. It was assumed that he was right-handed, of slender build, and about 170 cm tall. The analysis of the force used in the murders suggested an age range between 20 and 35 years. Beyond that, nothing more specific could be confirmed, which is very strange, don't you think? I also found information that the police discovered over 1,000 pieces of evidence at the crime scene. Fingerprints, footprints, clothing, the santoku knife, blood, and a large amount of the killer's biological material, such as hair and so on. Yet, none of this led the investigation anywhere.
The police even analyzed his feces left at the crime scene, since, as you may recall, he hadn't flushed. The analysis revealed that at some point before the murders, the man had eaten a simple meal of green beans and sesame seeds. Later, it was confirmed that both the kitchen knife used in the murders and the clothing worn by the killer were purchased in Kanagawa Prefecture in Japan, about an hour away. Over time, the police discovered that only 130 units of the sweater worn by the killer had been made and sold. This was excellent news, as this check helped narrow down the suspects. Unfortunately, the investigation only led to 12 buyers of these sweaters, none of whom were connected to the killer. Perhaps the most intriguing detail concerning the attacker's identity was the detailed analysis of the sand found in the abandoned bag. You might wonder, what does sand have to do with anything? Scientists managed to determine that it was sand from the Nevada desert in California, specifically from the area around Edwards Air Force Base. Since the murders, numerous hypotheses have been proposed regarding who might have been responsible for the senseless killings of this young and seemingly unremarkable family. These hypotheses vary in plausibility, but unfortunately, there is so little evidence that no theory appears more credible than another. The most common hypothesis suggests that the family became the victims of a stalker, possibly obsessed with a member of the family, driven by either maniacal jealousy or a pathological attachment. The obvious difference in the severity of injuries inflicted on the female members compared to the male members of the family led some psychologists to conclude that the killer may have harbored deep hatred toward women, possibly due to a personal tragedy or unfulfilled emotion. It is possible that the killer was a man obsessed with Yasuko Miyazawa, or an acquaintance of the family who felt wronged or humiliated by them at some point. There is also information that Yasuko's face was covered with a futon, and according to one article on the case in Japan, only people you know are usually covered after death. Nevertheless, the investigation into all possible suspects and interviews with the family's friends and relatives produced no significant results, and these theories remain speculative. One theory suggests that the tragedy was caused by the open space behind the Miyazawa family home. Rumors circulated that authorities had offered the family up to $100 million to move so that the park could be expanded. Additionally, according to some witnesses, a few weeks before his death, Mikio had a conflict with a group of young people at a local skateboarding park. It is therefore possible that this conflict led to some street gang deciding to take revenge for this perceived disrespect. Another popular theory suggests that the killer might have been a migrant or a homeless person, or a drifter, whichever term you prefer. Miyazawa family home, like many others in Japan, was just a few minutes' walk from the train station, which led to the idea that the perpetrator could have been traveling across the country using the extensive railway network. Since the 1980s, Japan had seen an increase in migration from neighboring Asian countries, as well as a rise in the number of people who had lost their homes. In the 1990s, Japan, like many other countries, went through a severe economic crisis. Many people lost their jobs and were unable to return to normal life. Some of them adopted a nomadic lifestyle, refusing to return to a society they felt had betrayed them. Perhaps the killer was one of these individuals, and the Miyazawa family home was chosen randomly, simply the first house he encountered while leaving the park. It's also possible that he saw them shopping for the new year and decided to follow them, with all the consequences that ensued.
One theory concerns the sand found in the bag. This sand was identified as material from the Nevada desert near Edwards Air Force Base. This raises the possibility that the killer had some connection to the American military. Some commentators suggested that the perpetrator could have been one of the 50,000 American servicemen stationed in Japan at the time. Unfortunately, history shows that American military personnel have occasionally been involved in high-profile crimes in Japan, leading to public outrage and calls for their removal from the country. This theory could also explain the mixed DNA profile found at the crime scene. Perhaps that is why he did not attempt to cover his tracks, because he knew he wasn't in any database. It almost seems as if he deliberately left everything as it was to show, leave everything here because you won't be able to find me anyway. And now, the year 2026 has begun, yet the investigation still continues, seemingly stretching beyond the limits of time. The latest update on the case was on May 24, 2024, when the district administration, where the tragedy occurred, requested permission from Tokyo to use the killer's DNA. Honestly, it seems as if there is little hope of solving this crime or catching the perpetrator. I agree that, while crime in Japan is not high, there is too lenient an attitude towards certain offenses. For some reason, when we discuss crime in Japan, we completely ignore sexual assault, bullying, driving people to suicide, pedophilia, and public indifference. They still have not resolved the problem of severe bullying in schools. In general, let us know which version you find the most realistic and share your opinions.